This is the sermon for January 29th, 2023, Justice with Kindness and Humility. I'm going to read first from Micah 6, 1 through 8. Listen now, listen to God. Take your stand in court. If you have a complaint, tell the mountains. Make your case to the hills. And now, mountains, hear God's case. Listen, jury earth, for I am bringing charges against my people. I am building a case against Israel. Dear people, how have I done you wrong? Have I burdened you, worn you out? Answer. I delivered you from a bad life in Egypt. I paid a good price to get you out of slavery. I sent Moses, Miriam, and Aaron to lead you. Remember all the obstacles you have faced. Keep all God's salvation stories fresh and present. And the people respond, how can I stand up before God and show proper respect? Should I bring an armload of offerings? Would God be impressed with thousands of rams, with buckets and barrels of olive oil? Would God be moved if I sacrificed my firstborn child, my precious baby, to cancel my sin? But God has already made it plain how to live, what to do, what God is looking for in us. It's quite simple. Do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love. And then I'm going to read from 1 Corinthians 1, 18 to 24. For the message of the cross is foolishness to the world, but to us who are called by God, it is the power of God. For God's chosen people demand signs, and Gentiles seek true philosophy. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block and folly to the world. But to those who are called, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Well, the Micah passage is an all-time favorite of many, many Christians. It's on mugs and posters and banners. There's a stunning contrast, in case you didn't hear it, and the contrast can get lost in the poetry and in the multiple lines of the poetry. And so I want to lay it out for you. There's a contrast between what God might require and what God actually requires. Now, in the poem, what God might require is what the gods supposedly required all around Israel at the time, what religions seemed to require, which was animals sacrificed on the altar, barrels and buckets of olive oil, perhaps barrels of grain, whatever it was that they figured God would want, including the sacrifice of the firstborn. And they thought that it would move God to cancel sin and to make people right with God. But it goes on to say, God has already made it plain how to live, what to do, what God is looking for. And that is to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. There are different translations of the Hebrew. The people responded with a list of things that God would have traditionally required. Again, sacrifices of farmers, sacrifices of herdsmen and cattle, even sacrifices of children. And God's answer to all of that is a resounding no. Absolutely not. What God requires is to do justice, to live with kindness, and to offer mercy, or to walk humbly with God. If we live by kindness, having compassion for others and for ourselves, we do our best, especially for the homeless and for those who are suffering. This is what God requires. What a contrast between typical religion of the time and what the God of the Jewish people required. If you were writing this passage today, what do you think the contrast would be between what the world expects and what the God of Israel and the Christians requires? And I can give you a hint. The answer to what God actually requires is the same then as it is today. It's a timeless passage. That's one reason why people love it so much. So my question is, what do the gods of the world today require? I told you what the gods of the world back then required: sacrifice of animals and sacrifice offerings of grain or oil, or even the sacrifice of children. What do the gods of today require? I thought about that. I thought about how endless work sometimes is required. There's no longer any kind of border between going to work and being at home. Now employees have email and texting, and many employees don't have a clear border between work at home and work at the office or work in the factory. And so we asked the question, what would endless work would be one thing the gods today would require. I've known parishioners that worked 16-hour days. I don't know how they did it, 7 days a week for long periods of time. I honestly don't know how they did it. I know the companies did it requiring more and more work because they didn't want to hire more people. They wanted to keep benefits capped, and so they could pay overtime, but they didn't want to hire more people. Another thing that the gods of today might require is the sacrifice of self, family, work, accumulating money and stuff. Definitely accumulating money and stuff is a big part of our culture, the gods of our culture today. We thought we knew what constituted salvation in the United States, and now that doesn't seem to be true any longer. It used to be hard work would get you ahead, and so hard work was worth it, whatever it cost. And we've partly left the old days behind us. Our culture is in a time of change. We haven't figured out what is new yet, what things are. Workers are questioning things. We're searching for balance in work and family and pleasure in many ways now, but we don't know yet what that looks like. Young people, many of them, are lost in the wilderness between the old ways and the new ways. And the church is struggling between the old ways and the new ways. What did God require and then and now? What does God require around us, and what does God require from us? And the church is struggling. One trend in the church is fewer committee meetings and more direct care, as is seen in Duran's clothing closet and the food pantry. People don't want to serve on a committee at a church, rightly so, but they're willing to do mission work. And so there's a lot of good in that. We just don't know yet what it looks like for churches. Many have taken to heart the requirement to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God. When Jesus answered the question, "What does the Lord require of you?" the answer comes, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the new reign of heaven." Jesus said, when you're poor, hungry, and broken, get ready to be filled with God's abundance. That's definitely upside down stuff. The poor and broken are especially blessed, is what Jesus said. I saw a poster that said, "Some people are so poor, all they have is money." Isn't that great? Jesus also said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." Peacemakers and negotiators are actually hated by everybody because they can't please everyone, and sometimes they please no one in the process of negotiating and making peace. The world's way is all about ego. Remember, ego is my way or the highway. The world's way is all about happiness, comfort, and accumulating wealth without limit. Look at what we've done with our heroes in society, with the people considered at the top of our culture. It's almost as if "blessed are the bullies" is lifted up in our culture because they win. Blessed are the warmongers, for they'll be called all-powerful. It's almost like politics is the whole picture. Status and wealth seem to be what really matters. Where there is justice, kindness, and compassion, is that where you find the people at the top of our society, the top of power? That's part of why this Micah passage is so beloved and so timeless. The Message translation is saying, "Blessed are those at the end of their rope, because they will see the grace of God through the hard times in life and faith." The internet is a new god of this age. It lifts up those who are devious and sneaky, those who are manipulative, those who lie, those who whine, those who conform to popular opinion, those who have low expectations, those who are loud. Those people rise on the internet. The Micah passage speaks to the God of the internet and cuts through all the BS. What God requires is to do justice, practice compassion and kindness, and walk humbly. Is that what we see on the internet? The world's way is into war, the sacrifice of the young, mainly for profits. War leaves precious little room for justice, compassion, and walking humbly. If Jesus said those who are poor and broken are most blessed, who would want to be a Christian if it involves being poor and broken? The wisdom of the world is really foolishness. God's foolishness is really wisdom. God's weakness is stronger than human strength. So we get into the upside down stuff in 1 Corinthians 1. It's the foolishness of God's wisdom that sets us free. Our Savior hung on a cross, humiliated and suffering. I saw another poster that said, "Pride makes us artificial, humility makes us real." Christ's crucifixion is foolishness to the world, and it's the wisdom of God. Being needy rather than self-sufficient is the wisdom of God. Being self-sufficient is a god of our culture. Being needy is somehow connected with the gospel, with the good news, with being connected with others. Being needy is part of God's wisdom. When we're needy, we're open. We are open to connection and receiving the gift of help. Reaching out for help is not weakness, it's a sign of strength. You wouldn't know that to look around, especially in the church. Reaching out for help is not weakness, it's a sign of strength. 1 Corinthians says, God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God. There's that humility again that we see in Micah. How do we live differently in the world because we're followers of Jesus? How much of a challenge is it to live differently as followers of Jesus?